Pierre Bonnard was a French painter, illustrator and printmaker, known for his highly personal style. He made his daily life the subject of his art, observing everything that was closest to him, and committing it to canvas with intense color and emotional depth, rather than with strict realism. A founding member of the post-impressionist group the Nabis, he was strongly influenced by the work of Paul Gauguin, as well as by Japanese artists. His innovative techniques have firmly established him as a pivotal figure in the transition from Impressionism to post-impressionist art. He was born near Paris in 1867, and had a brother Charles and a sister Andrée. His father, Eugène Bonnard, was a senior official in the French Ministry of War. Bonnard was educated in Paris, and in his youth, showed a talent for drawing and watercolors, as well as caricatures. He painted frequently in the gardens of his parents' country home. After taking his baccalaureate, in which he distinguished himself in classics, Bonnard moved to Paris in 1885 and, at the insistence of his father, enrolled in the Faculty of Law at the Sorbonne University. Bonnard lived with his grandmother in Paris during his early studies, but by 1889 he had moved out and begun living independently. During 1887, in addition to his law studies, Bonnard began studying art at the Académie Julian, a private art school in Paris. He attended the academy intermittently between 1887 and 1889. It was here that he met his friends and the fellow artists that were later to form the Nabis art movement. After graduating in law in 1888, he attempted the subsequent professional qualification exam but failed. Unable to enter the official registry of lawyers, he briefly worked in a clerical legal administrative post in a government office, which had been arranged by his father. While still working for the government and attending Académie Julian, Bonnard sat for the entrance exam for the Paris School of Fine Arts, and was accepted in late 1888. He tried to win the prestigious Prix de Rome scholarship, which would have allowed him to study in Italy. However, he was unsuccessful, and he left the School of Fine Arts, returning to the Académie Julian to continue his art studies. French law required him to undertake full-time compulsory military training, so between 1889 and 1890, he served as a second-class soldier in the 52nd Infantry Regiment of the French Army. His unit was headquartered in a town located 50 kilometers northwest of Paris. He kept up with events in the art world through letters from his friends in Paris, and spent his spare time reading and drawing, while experimenting with decorative flat color in his art. Earlier, in 1888, one of Bonnard's friends from Académie Julian, Paul Sirassier, had visited artist Paul Gauguin at the Pont-Aven commune in the French region of Brittany. Sirassier returned to Paris full of Gauguin's ideas on painting, which he discussed with his fellow students. Sirassier brought back with him a small painting he had created with Gauguin's guidance. He called it the Talisman, and used it to illustrate Gauguin's ideas to his friends, particularly the artist's use of flat patches of bold, non-naturalistic color. Over time, the students used and amplified Gauguin's ideas, creating a shared philosophy which later became known as the Nabi art movement. The word Nabi is taken from the Hebrew word for prophet. To the Nabi artists, the purpose of art was to reveal the unseen, such as ideas, moods, and spiritual states. They believed they could do this through their paintings by flattening pictorial space, using bold non-naturalistic color, and simplifying forms into planes and patterns. They saw the artist as a guide, one who could reveal spiritual truths, which aligned closely with the idea of a prophet as one who sees. In 1890, 20-year-old Maurice Denis formalized the group's doctrines in a written manifesto. From then on, the Nabis began thinking of a painting as a surface covered with colors, assembled in a certain order. What became known as the Nabi style is now considered to be the transition between Impressionism and post-Impressionist art. In 1890, Bonnard's military service ended, and he returned to Paris. He shared a studio in Montmartre with his Académie Julian friends, Maurice Denis and Édouard Vuillard, as well as the young actor Aurélien Lune-Poe. Bonnard returned to his part-time attendance at Académie Julian, and began painting more seriously. During his life, Bonnard produced at least 12 self-portraits, of which this is the earliest. It seems significant that it is the only one in which he portrays himself as a painter, since it was around this time that he decided to abandon the idea of pursuing a career in law or the civil service. He was now fully participating in the group and contributing to NABI discussions and decorative principles. He abandoned three-dimensional modeling in favor of flat color areas, and his work began to shift toward poster design and decorative panels. An example is this painting, The Croquet Match, where the croquet players merge and re-emerge from the green carpet of the background, as though woven out of the same material. In 1891, the France Champagne Company organized a competition for an advertising poster. Bonnard submitted a design and was selected as the winner. In the poster, a seemingly frivolous female looks over her shoulder, holding a fan in one hand and her magical glass of champagne in the other. There is a witty play on the oneness of the young girl with the bubbles of champagne, which engulf the woman, making her part of the total pattern. The poster was printed as a color lithograph and displayed widely on the streets of Paris. The 100-franc prize was a special victory for Bonnard, since it demonstrated to his father that he was able to support himself as an artist. 1891 became a monumental year for Bonnard, thrusting him into the spotlight, his poster designs bringing him a wider audience. At his first major exhibition with the Society of Independent Artists, Bonnard showed 5 canvases and 4 decorative panels, alongside the famed artist Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. He also showed work in a joint exhibition with the other Nabis at the Galerie Le Barque de Boutteville, one of the most important early promoters of the group in Paris. Some of the Nabis had highly religious, philosophical and mystical approaches to their paintings, but Bonnard remained more cheerful and unaffiliated. He was not a mystic. Instead, he was fascinated and delighted by the scenes of simple daily life around him. He had an instinct for what would work in a painting. He invariably recognized the precise point where his elaborations were getting out of hand, and where he needed to introduce an ironic note. The painter-writer Aurélien Lune-Poe, who shared a studio with Bonnard, said, "Pierre Bonnard was the humorist among us. His nonchalant gaiety, and the humor expressed in his productions always created a sort of decorative satire." In the 1890s, Japanese art was beginning to be shown in Paris, and the Nabi artists were inspired. Bonnard first saw Japanese art prints at a Paris gallery run by Siegfried Bing. Between 1888 and 1891, Bing published a monthly Japanese art journal, which included color illustrations. Fascinated by what he saw, Japanese influences began to appear in Bonnard's work. He was particularly interested in the use of unusual visual vantage points and bold geometric patterns in clothing. This passion for Japanese art soon earned him a nickname among the members of his group: the Very Japanese Nabi. Bonnard used the theme of Japanese scroll art in a series of paintings Women in the Garden, now in the Muséum d'Orsay in Paris. Originally designed to appear together as a single screen, he finally created the work as 4 separate decorative panels. The female forms are reduced to flat silhouettes, and there is no rendering of depth in the pictures. The faces are turned away from the viewer and the panels are dominated by the colors and the bold patterns of the costumes and the backgrounds. In 1890, Bonnard's sister Andrée married Claude Terrasse, a composer and music teacher. Bonnard and Terrasse later collaborated on illustrating Terrasse's musical primer for children, as well as Terrasse's musical scores. At the time, Bonnard was also involved in contemporary experimental theatre, through his studio companion, Lune-Poe. He designed stage sets and playbills for Théâtre d'Art productions, and later worked for Lune-Poe's own theatrical company, the Théâtre de l'Œuvre. As well as music and theatre, Bonnard was an early adopter of photography, buying a Kodak camera soon after it appeared on the market in 1888. He became an avid amateur photographer for several years in the late 1890s. For Bonnard, photographs were rarely a direct blueprint for his paintings. Instead, they served as memory aids that captured the spirit and unusual perspectives which he later translated onto the canvas. His favorite subjects were recording joyous family holidays with his sister Andrée and her growing family at the Bonnard family's country property near Grenoble. During the 1890s, he painted over 50 pictures of his family. In 1892, Bonnard took a new direction, creating a series of paintings depicting the daily life of Paris. He was interested in the way in which Parisians approached life as a free open-air theatre, an ever-changing spectacle that anyone could watch. Inspired by his daily walks through the city, his sketches, which he called the theatre of the everyday, were later transferred to canvas. Despite appearing traditional at first glance, Bonnard's work is profoundly modern, featuring abrupt cropping, high angles, and distorted perspectives, influenced by his interest in Japanese prints. These days, Bonnard is best known for his intimate domestic scenes, which often include his companion and model, Marthe de Maleny, whom he met in 1893 in Montmartre. De Maleny worked for a company supplying silk flowers for fashionable hat making. Recognizing that Bonnard was socially in a class above her, Marthe told him her name was Marthe de Maleny, and that she was an orphan of Italian noble descent. She also told him she was 16, when in reality she was 24. It would be many years before Bonnard was to discover that Marthe's real name was Maria Boursan, and that she broke off all contact with her family, and changed her name, before the two of them met. Although their different social backgrounds meant that Bonnard was unable to introduce her to his family and friends, de Maleny became Bonnard's lifelong companion and close collaborator. She became the obsessive subject of his work. He painted her more than 380 times. In the early years of their relationship, de Maleny became his inspirational model, allowing Bonnard to experiment with erotically charged subjects. He often sketched her in their small apartment. And he included her in all of his paintings, whether it was in the garden, inside the house, or while washing in the bathroom. Here, he and Marthe photographed each other in a summer garden. These modern Adam and Eve snaps inspired the composition of several paintings, where he integrated naked figures into the overhanging landscape. Some of his indoor shots included several sunlit photos of Marthe posing in their bedroom. In 1894, Bonnard received his first commission for graphic design, creating a front piece for the art magazine La Revue Blanche. The poster depicts Missia Natanzone, the wife of the magazine's publisher, Tadej Natanzone. The composition, a daring abstract image in unexpectedly somber tones, features flat expanses of color, an asymmetrical layout, and rhythmic linear design, all hallmarks of the Nabi style. It is considered a masterpiece of turn-of-the-century graphic art. Between 1893 and 1903, Bonnard produced more than 35 images for the journal. Tadej Natanzone became Bonnard's lifelong friend and biographer. He was an important early supporter of the Nabis, and a collector of Bonnard's works. Through him the artist gained wider recognition in the avant-garde circles of Paris at the time. Natanzone purchased this painting, Young Girl with Dog, shortly after Bonnard painted it in 1894. By 1895, Bonnard began to work more frequently in lithography. Many of his works were published by the well-known art dealer Ambroise Vollard, whom he had met in 1893. Bonnard also began to participate in the newly emerging Art Nouveau movement, creating highly aesthetic works in textiles, furniture and stained glass. He held his first solo exhibition in 1896, in Paul Durand Ruhl's gallery, where he showed 49 paintings, and some posters and lithographs. Not all critics liked his work. The impressionist Camille Pissarro called Bonnard's work hideous, and the conservative art critic Camille Mauclair wrote that Nabis like Bonnard often confused the principles of decoration with those of painting, which he said are totally different. Bonnard has often been labeled a late impressionist, but in this painting his unique use of color enriches and heightens the usual impressionist palette. Here he views the figure from an interesting angle, and his layout and brushwork, which has created a moodier, erotic atmosphere, suggests that he imagines the viewer as a peeping Tom. By 1900, Bonnard began moving toward the mature style of his 20th century work. He continued to explore new methods and genres in the rapidly changing art world, but his painting style and subject matter remained largely the same. Emboldened by his early work in decoration, Bonnard began a pragmatic investigation of the use of paint and surface in his paintings. One of these works is Man and Woman. It belongs to his realist period, during which he painted frank portraits, documenting his relationship with his companion, Marthe de Maligny. A series of major exhibitions took place after 1900, in which he showed several times at the Salon of the Independents, and participated in a showing of nudes and portraits at the Bernheim Jeune Gallery. One of these works was Siesta, which became well known among Paris's literary and artistic circles. It was once owned by the influential American novelist, poet, and art collector, Gertrude Stein. Marthe's pose in Siesta is thought to have been influenced by a famously erotic Roman sculpture in the Paris Louvre Museum, the Borghese Hermaphrodite. Bonnard presented 9 paintings at the Salon of the Independents in 1901, and participated in a group showing at Bernheim Jeune Gallery in Paris. In 1902, he was the subject of a lithographic portrait by artist Odilon Redon. Although Redon was 27 years older than Bonnard, the two artists shared a mutual admiration for art, and a solid personal friendship. Redon produced this lithographic portrait of Bonnard, and in return, Bonnard painted a portrait of Redon's son, Ari. In 1903, Bonnard exhibited widely, showing his portrait of Terrasse at the Independents, and participating in the first Autumn Salon with 3 canvases. In the same year he also participated in the Viennese Secession exhibition. Some of Bonnard's early works often featured sunny gardens, populated with friends and family members. These often eccentric compositions showcased Bonnard's wit. He found it funny to sneak a figure into a corner, or have a cat staring out at the viewer. These works, which were based on his day-to-day experiences, are painted with an innovative flattening of the surface and reduced perspective. No single area of the composition is allowed to dominate the picture. In 1906, Bonnard entered into a significant long-term selling agreement with the Bernheim Jeune brothers, who were key contemporary art dealers in Paris. The partnership brought Bonnard financial stability, and in November 1906, the gallery hosted an exhibition of his work. The relationship was enduring, with the brothers acting as his primary dealers from 1906 until the 1920s and beyond. After visits to Nice and Saint-Tropez with painters Paul Signac and Henri Matisse, all of whom were influenced by the strong light of the south of France, Bonnard's work began to shift toward brighter colors. In 1907 he entered 10 paintings in a group show at Bernheim Jeune Gallery, and exhibited a decorative panel at the Autumn Salon. 2 of his paintings were also shown in a French Impressionist exhibition in Prague. Between 1907 and 1911, Bonnard traveled extensively through Europe and North Africa, visiting museums in the company of several of his friends. These excursions seemed not to have influenced his art to any great extent. In 1908, Bonnard had an extended stay in Saint-Tropez with painter Henri Manguin. Manguin produced vibrant light-filled landscapes with intense color and balanced composition, reflecting his lifelong commitment to Fauvism. In September of the same year, Bonnard also spent time with the Polish painter Józef Pankiewicz, whom he met earlier in Paris. Although the two artists had been influenced by Impressionism, they were now both experimenting with new post-Impressionist styles. It was around this time that Bonnard's intimist period came to a close. His pictures, such as the bathroom, began to be painted on a larger scale, and with broader and more colored effects. In 1908, financial difficulties forced Tadej Natenzone, owner of La Revue Blanche, to sell his art collection. It contained numerous paintings by Bonnard and Édouard Vuillard. Many of Bonnard's now iconic Narby period works were sold off. The auction was a landmark event for post-impressionist art, highlighting the Narbys as an art group, showcasing their talents, and at the same time bolstering the individual artists' reputations. Bonnard's painting, The Artist's Studio, was acquired by the Bernheim Jeune Gallery. The piece reflects Bonnard's signature use of color and light, and highlights his exploration of interior spaces, a recurring theme in his work. Standing Nude was painted around the same time. It has the look of a study done from life, using a professional model. There is little going on between the figure and the background, and in it we can feel Bonnard's discomfort. A shy and retiring man, he found it extremely difficult to paint from life, just as he found it almost impossible to paint the unfamiliar. He was equally uncomfortable painting portraits, even though the subjects were usually friends or acquaintances. One subject recalled how Bonnard sat in front of him and made sketches in a small notebook. Later, he made further drawings on large sheets of paper. 6 months afterwards, Bonnard summoned the subject to his studio and presented him with the painting. It was completely finished. In 1910, Bonnard painted this view of a boat moored at high tide. The work captures the coastal town with a focus on fleeting light and atmosphere. Bonnard's work here differs from more traditional views, giving a more subjective perspective. This may be due to him painting from memory, and exploring the mood of the painting, rather than its subject. Later, when describing his method, he said, "I have all my subjects to hand. I go back and look at them. I take notes. Then I go home. And before I start painting, I reflect and dream." In late 1910, Bonnard traveled again to the Mediterranean to paint. As his work progressed, his interest in color and form increased. This piece, Woman with Parrot, was painted in Saint-Tropez. The work is based on a real-life encounter between Bonnard and a young dark-haired girl carrying a large blue parrot. The work is noted for its intensely bright and hot colors. In the Garden in the Snow, Sunset, painted in 1910, Bonnard has used visible impressionist-like brushstrokes with a bolder, more dramatic color palette. Not only is the sky scarlet, but the remaining snow on the ground is tinged with a pale purple blue, giving it a subtle and distinctive glow. For Bonnard, color was an end in itself. He used it as a way to experience the world. Color was so important to him that when he had mixed a color that he liked, he would sometimes use it to touch up other paintings in his studio. He once persuaded his friend Édouard Vuillard to distract one of the guards in a museum, while he reworked a painting that he had completed years previously. Bonnard exhibited 4 decorative portraits of Monsieur Godowska at the Autumn Salon in Paris in March 1910. These paintings reflect the Baroque luxury of Monsieur's surroundings, after her marriage to wealthy publisher Alfred Edwards. Bonnard's surviving paintings from 1910 include several nudes, among them Nude in Lamplight. As the subject's face is deep in shadow, it is hard to know whether this is Marthe undressing. Her body is partially lit by the small bedside lamp, which produces dark shadows, changing her form. In 1911, he made 3 separate trips to Saint-Tropez, and painted views of the port during his visits. It was in that year, he received one of the most significant commissions of his career when he was asked to create a series of decorative panels for Ivan Morozov, a wealthy Russian industrialist and one of the era's most prolific collectors of modern French art. Morozov wanted a large-scale work to decorate the grand staircase of his mansion in Moscow. He specifically requested a scene that evoked the warmth and light of the south of France. Believing that the paintings should integrate seamlessly with the architecture, Bonnard created 3 4-meter-high panels to be installed between columns. Often referred to as the Mediterranean triptych, the scene depicts the garden of Bonnard's house at the time, but infused with the radiant, saturated light of the Mediterranean coast. In 1911, he held a one-man exhibition at the Bernheim-Jeune Gallery, showing 27 paintings, including the 3 Mediterranean panels he created for Morozov. He showed the panels again at the Autumn Salon of that year. In 1912, after renting accommodation along the Seine each spring for several years, Bonnard and Marthe bought a small house in Vernonet, a village 70 kilometers northwest of Paris. The property sits on the river, and is just a few kilometers from Giverny, where Bonnard's friend Claude Monet lived for many years. Monet enjoyed discussions with younger painters such as Bonnard, who visited him regularly. In November 1926, Bonnard visited Monet for the last time. The great man died the following month. The house in Vernonet, which they called Ma Roulotte, or My Caravan, served as the couple's primary residence until they moved to the south of France in 1925. Over the years it became Bonnard's artistic inspiration, appearing in many of his paintings while he focused on interiors and landscapes. Bonnard's subjects were always his private life and fragile intimacy. Typically, when he painted an indoor scene, it had a view onto the natural world beyond, usually through a window or an open door. These paintings encourage slow viewing, letting the eye wander across the canvas to take in the various elements of his work. In Dining Room in the Country, set in Bonnard's house at Vernonet, he shows his subtlety as an artist. There are no real space-defining objects in this picture, and the chair and the washstand blend into the wall. The eye's movement across the canvas is dependent on color, moving from the warm indoor tones to the cool outdoors by way of the orange areas of the scene. He uses the technique again years later, in The Terrace at Vernon, where the juxtaposition of bright yellows against cool blues and greens draws the viewer's eye across the composition, creating a dynamic sense of movement. Bonnard's long-standing agreement with the Bernheim-Jeune brothers provided him with a platform for regular solo exhibitions, and in 1913 he showed 21 recent works, highlighting his evolving style and his use of non-traditional pictorial space, replacing pure naturalism. During the years of the First World War, Bonnard, who was never called up for war service, concentrated on painting still lifes, nudes and portraits. Aside from a few war-themed sketches, there are no traces of the war's impact on his art. Around 1915, Bonnard decided that he had been sacrificing form for color. From then on, until the late 1920s, he began painting nudes that reflected a new concern for structure, while retaining their strong color values. The subjects are always simple, but are rendered with luminous color and intriguing compositions. In 1916, he completed a series of large compositions, including Pastoral Symphony and Earthly Paradise. In the same year, he was represented by 15 paintings in an exhibition of French art in Winterthur, Switzerland. In 1918, Bonnard and Pierre Auguste Renoir were elected as joint honorary presidents of the Association of Young French Artists. This position highlighted Bonnard's role as a respected elder figure within the modernist art scene of the French art establishment. In the years before Bonnard and Marthe were married, Bonnard often spent weeks alone in Paris, attending exhibitions or commissions. While he was there, he sometimes socialized with models and acquaintances that he met on his travels. Between 1916 and 1918, Bonnard had an affair with the wife of Bonnard's family doctor, Lucienne Dupuy de Fresnel, whose husband was away at the front during World War I. She became one of his favorite models, and appears in several of his paintings. The relationship seems to have been in parallel with, rather than replacing Marthe, who always remained the central figure in Bonnard's life. In 1918, Bonnard first met René Moncharti. He was 50, and she was 18. Moncharti was originally the partner of American painter Harry Lachman, and Bonnard met her while she was in that relationship. After beginning to model for Bonnard, she left Lachman and became Bonnard's lover, appearing in a number of his paintings after 1918. René wasn't the first model Bonnard had slept with, but this tall, thin, slightly stooping and short-sighted man was not a philanderer, and it is doubtful that he expected the affair to last in the way that it did. He was not a man who craved variety, and most days, he went straight from the studio to his suburban home, where Marthe, their 2 cats and Juno the dachshund, would be waiting. In March 1921, Bonnard traveled to Rome with Moncharti for 2 weeks. Like many artists of his generation, Bonnard visited Rome to see classical and Renaissance art, though the surviving evidence suggests this trip was more personal than professional. Compared with other journeys in his life, the Rome stay produced remarkably little finished work. Some biographers suggest Bonnard intended to meet René's family and discuss marriage while he was there. When he returned, he and Marthe went on as if nothing had happened, continuing to live together, while spending long periods at their country house in Vernonet. Bonnard created this painting in 1924. It shows a dinner table at his house in Vernonet. Bonnard almost always painted from memory, so the scene may not represent a historical event, but a compilation of images, some from earlier works, or even from his imagination. The figure on the right, standing behind the table, is thought to be a servant, even though the couple did not employ servants. Bonnard shows Marthe on the left, lost in thought. Perhaps Bonnard is reflecting the underlying tension he felt in their relationship during this time. Bonnard continued to be highly productive during the 1920s. His bright sunlit compositions, showing comfy interiors, as well as tender unassuming nudes, candid portraits, and saturated lush landscapes, were sought after by galleries and collectors alike. Galerie du Rouet in Paris, a significant venue for modernist works, held the first major retrospective of Bonnard's paintings in 1924, a milestone that solidified his position as a distinguished painter at that time. The retrospective featured 68 works, showcasing the evolution of his style from the early days as a member of the Nabis to his later maturing focus on color and light. Between 1922 and 1926, Bonnard and Marthe rented accommodation in Le Carnet on the Mediterranean coast near Cannes, spending increasing amounts of their time there, rather than living in Vernonet in the north. In Bonnard's painting The Window, showing the couple's apartment in Le Carnet, interior and exterior spaces seem to merge. The work combines 3 of Bonnard's obsessions: domestic interior space, the outside world flooding inward, and Marthe as an elusive presence. Through the window are the red roofs of Le Carnet. In the foreground on the table, lies a book and writing implements. The book is the novel Marie by Peter Nansen, that Bonnard illustrated in 1898. On the balcony in a central position, and shown in profile, is Marthe reading. This picture, The Palm, painted in 1926, captures the view to Le Carnet and beyond. Here Bonnard is using color to describe objects, as well as creating an atmosphere. He often used complementary colors, like vibrant yellows and violets, or pinks and oranges, to make the surface of his canvases vibrate with light. By 1925, Bonnard was in trouble. Over several years he had developed strong feelings for his lover René Moncharti, and at the same time, he felt a deep-seated psychological need for his companion of over 30 years, Marthe de Malany. This self-portrait, which is unlike anything else he had done, suggests his turmoil at the time. Faced with mounting psychological pressures, Bonnard gave in to the status quo and finally married Marthe, in a secret civil ceremony in Paris in August 1925. They had lived together for more than 30 years. True to their reclusive natures, no friends or family were invited to the wedding. From then on, Bonnard kept his marriage a secret, his family finding out about it only after his death. Some accounts suggest that Marthe had threatened suicide if Bonnard abandoned her for René, but this appears to be a later dramatic interpretation of events. There is no documentary evidence to support it. What is known is that roughly 1 month after René Moncharti found out about Bonnard's wedding, she committed suicide. This tragedy is thought to have so upset Bonnard that he and Marthe left Paris to live in the south of France. Later historians and critics have dramatized the story, suggesting a wide-reaching scandal. However, there is no evidence to support this view. The news of Moncharti's death was probably only known to a few people who knew Bonnard and René personally at the time. In 1926, Bonnard and Marthe purchased a small pink villa with a large garden in Le Carnet, on the hillside above Cannes. It was called Villa Bosquet, or the Grove, and it was to become the couple's permanent residence until their respective deaths, although Bonnard still returned to their house in Vernon frequently to paint. The couple lived simply in Le Carnet, with few luxuries, apart from a modern bathroom and a car. Visitors to Le Bosquet were invariably struck by the simplicity of the furnishings, and by the small, impractical and uncomfortable workroom that was Bonnard's studio. Bonnard's picture, Le Carnet, View from the Pink House, gives us some idea of the spectacular Mediterranean views they both enjoyed from their villa's location, which was then a quiet village. Bonnard produced more than 300 works during his 25 years at Le Carnet. The rooms, garden and surroundings of the villa providing the setting for many of his late interiors and landscapes, and some say his most inspired and beautiful works. In October 1926, Bonnard visited America as a member of the jury for the Carnegie Prize, which was awarded by the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. He toured in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York and Washington. Bonnard had a significant relationship with the Carnegie Prize, having been both a recipient and a juror. In 1923, at the 22nd Annual International Exhibition, he had won third prize, $500 and a bronze medal, for his painting The Violet Fence. The work is currently in the permanent collection of the Carnegie Museum of Art. Bonnard's art in the south of France is full of scenes of nature, and indoor and outdoor life. His daily routine consisted of early morning walks along paths overlooking Le Carnet, and while on these outings he sketched, and sometimes photographed the subjects he intended to paint. Inside his house, he turned ordinary moments, like Marthe sipping tea, or brushing her hair, into profound enigmatic dramas. Indoors or outdoors, his scenes are rarely straightforward. He often camouflaged his subjects, turning them away, or reflecting them in mirrors, creating a sense of mystery and psychological depth. In these works, bathtubs tilt, tabletops slide forward, mirrors reflect ambiguous or impossible viewpoints, and figures appear partially cropped or oddly scaled. When working in his studio, he preferred to paint things he had lived with for a long time, saying, "I find it very difficult to introduce new elements into my still lifes." These objects, such as teapots, baskets and vases, occupied an important place in a complex system he used to compose his pictures, combining living models with inanimate objects. His studio working methods were far from organized. He painted multiples of canvases simultaneously, often tacking them to the walls of his small studio. He was uneasy about stretching his canvases on a frame, as he claimed never to know in advance what dimensions he was going to choose for them. Never being satisfied, and endlessly retouching his work, the chronological order of many of his paintings is difficult to determine, other than to give them approximate completion dates or best guesses. In 1929, Bonnard was represented in an exhibition of modern French art in Brussels, and in 1930, by 7 paintings in the exhibition Painting in Paris, at the New York Museum of Modern Art. Over the years, Bonnard had taken numerous snapshots of Marthe bathing, capturing her crouching, or lying in the tub. These images show small urban bathrooms, with windows and mirrors typical of early 20th century middle-class apartments. Bonnard often used photos to remind him of these scenes. Sometimes years later, he referred to the photo again, replacing the camera's literal details with a symphony of strong colors and shimmering light that the black-and-white film could never capture. Marthe, who suffered from a chronic skin condition, gained some relief from bathing, so the bathroom became the principal setting for many of Bonnard's works. Elements are used repeatedly in these paintings, including Marthe's body partly submerged in water, a deep bathtub viewed from above, a tiled floor with geometric patterns, and windows illuminating the bath. These colorful celebrations of Marthe's body are among his most recognizable images. Here, Marthe is naked after her bath. The scene is intensely personal, with a sense of privacy and even of confinement. Although Bonnard painted many of these bathroom works, he seldomly reveals Marthe's face. She famously did not like being looked at by others, and Bonnard often carried an umbrella in public to shield her from the gaze of strangers. In 1930, Bonnard wrote in a letter, "For quite some time now, I have been living a very secluded life as Marthe has become completely antisocial, and I am obliged to avoid all contact with other people." Over the years, Marthe became as much a fixture in Bonnard's pictures as the objects he used in his still lifes. He was obsessed. Nothing in his surroundings was allowed to change, and this included Marthe. In these paintings, she never grows old. There are pictures of her painted when she was in her 70s, where she still has the hourglass figure of a woman in her 30s. Bonnard's later nudes are no longer driven by the sexual intensity of his early works. They relate more to the historical tradition of the nude in art. The flatness of the image, and the high-pitched hues of color he used, reflect the latest modernist practices at the time. However, some avant-garde commentators criticized Bonnard, calling him old-fashioned and irrelevant. These attacks left Bonnard disturbed, and may have prompted the series of probing late self-portraits, which defied the climate of the times. "I am working a lot," he said. "Immersed more and more deeply in my outdated passion for painting. Perhaps with a few others, I am one of the last survivors." Around the same time, he confessed that he saw every new object in pictures he tried to paint as a source of intimidation. "For most of my life I have been coming back to the same old subjects," he said. In 1935, Bonnard's work appeared in an exhibition at the Palace of Fine Arts in Brussels. This was followed by an exhibition of his work at the Reed and Lefebvre Gallery in London. As World War II began, and the occupation of France was imminent, Bonnard fled Paris, making his studio his villa in Le Carnet, where he stayed until the end of the war. In an auction at the Hôtel du Rouet, in December 1941, part of the Félix Fénéan collection was sold. This was the first major dispersal of Fénéan's collection, which included numerous modern masters, including Bonnard, Seurat, and Matisse. The event was most successful. 6 paintings by Bonnard are said to have been purchased for close to 1 million francs in the sale. In her later years, Marthe Bonnard became increasingly reclusive, and suffered from poor health, due to asthma. In 1941, she became seriously ill. After months in decline, she died of a heart attack in January 1942 at the couple's home in Le Carnet. She was 72, and Bonnard was 74. They had lived together for almost 50 years. Bonnard wrote to his friend Henri Matisse soon afterward, "I have sad news," he said. "After months of illness, my poor Marthe died of a cardiac arrest. You can imagine my grief and solitude." Marthe was buried in the cemetery at Le Carnet, close to their home. During World War II, Bonnard maintained his residence in Le Carnet, continuing there as a recluse, mourning his wife's death. In 1946, a retrospective showing 34 of Bonnard's major works was organized by Bernheim Jeune Gallery in Paris. In December of that year, an exhibition of 15 of his paintings appeared at the Big New Gallery in New York. In 1947, a week before his death, he finished his last painting, The Almond Tree in Blossom. Pierre Bonnard died in Le Carnet on January 23, 1947, and is buried in the cemetery Notre-Dame des Anges in Le Carnet, alongside Marthe, his wife, his muse and his lifelong companion. Following Bonnard's death, a prolonged inheritance dispute began, as a result of his wife Marthe not leaving a will before she died. Under French civil law, her death entitled her blood relatives to claim half of the Bonnard joint estate, including his valuable unsold paintings. To avoid losing half his fortune to strangers after Marthe died, Bonnard forged a will in Marthe's name, leaving everything to himself. Unfortunately, he dated the will after her death, making the forgery obvious. The issue was not pursued while he was alive due to the war, but it surfaced after his own death in 1947, when the estate was to be settled. At the time of his death there were hundreds of oil paintings, watercolors, and drawings at his house in Le Carnet. These works represented the bulk of the estate's value. The courts identified 4 of Marthe's nieces, who claimed their legal share, arguing that the wool Bonnard had produced was forged, and therefore invalid. On the other side, Bonnard's heirs attempted to prove that the marriage itself was invalid since Marthe had misled Bonnard by using a false name and by not revealing her family background. They hoped this would weaken the legitimacy of claims by Marthe's relatives. After 10 years, the dispute ended in a compromise. Bonnard's heirs retained much of the estate, and Marthe's nieces received a portion, resulting in the division of the paintings between the two families. Ironically, the legal strategy had required Bonnard's supporters to argue that the woman who had been his partner and primary model for over 40 years was essentially an impostor, who tricked him into a loveless marriage. Yet Bonnard's paintings themselves suggest something quite different. Marthe appears repeatedly in Bonnard's work, especially in bath scenes, bedroom interiors and domestic spaces. She was arguably the most important subject of his entire career. Modern historians increasingly think the negative image of Marthe that has appeared in many later Bonnard biographies, where she was described as secretive, neurotic and manipulative, was exaggerated, partly shaped by the need to discredit her actions during the inheritance dispute. In October 1947, after Bonnard's death, the Musée de l'Orangerie arranged a large retrospective exhibition of Bonnard's work. It was reviewed by Christian Ziervos, the art critic of the authoritative periodical Cahiers d'Art. His article was titled "Is Pierre Bonnard a Great Artist?" Ziervos dismissed Bonnard as weak-willed and lacking originality. He claimed Bonnard's work was merely facile and agreeable, and suited only to those who did not understand the great difficulties of art. Upon reading the issue, Henri Matisse, a close friend and longtime admirer of Bonnard, was reportedly enraged. In a defiant rebuttal, Matisse said, "I certify that Pierre Bonnard is a great painter today, and assuredly in the future." While Bonnard's work found allies amongst his friends and supporters at the time, his future as a great modernist seemed far from certain. In 1964, Françoise Gillot quoted Picasso in her biography, Life with Picasso. According to Gillot, Picasso dismissed Bonnard as not really a modern painter, and called him a potpourri of indecision. He went on to say that Bonnard was just another neo-impressionist. And, the end of an old idea, not the beginning of a new one. Later, while reviewing the Tate Modern's 2019 Bonnard exhibition, The Color of Memory, Waldemar Januszczak, the art critic of the Times, picked up Picasso's opinion of Bonnard and wrote, too many marks, too many colors, too little sense of direction. He heavily criticized Bonnard's drawing skills, calling his outlines clumsy and awkward, and arguing that Bonnard used brightness to mask a lack of brilliance, creating expanses of busy uncertainty, rather than decisive forms. It was Janusczak's opinion that Bonnard's constant reworking of canvases actually took him further away from reality. Many critics did not agree with Janusczak's dismissal. Some defended Bonnard's aesthetic of indeterminacy, arguing that what the critic was describing is actually part of Bonnard's deliberate method, and a strength in his work, especially when experienced through slow attentive observation. Recent critical scholarship does not ignore past opinions, it reinterprets Bonnard's supposed indeterminacy, instability and subjectivity as being early modern, rather than being a failing. Bonnard, who is recognized for his contribution to one of art history's most innovative periods, is seen as a central transitional figure in post-impressionism. His singular style is considered the highlight of his work, and the public seem to agree. His 1928 painting, The Terrace at Vernon, was auctioned in 2011 at Christie's London for £7 million, a record price for the artist in a public sale. Pierre Bonnard has been described as the most thoroughly idiosyncratic of the great 20th century painters. The unusual vantage points of his compositions are said to rely less on traditional modes of pictorial structure, and more on strong color, visual wit and poetic allusions. Viewed by some as a late practitioner of Impressionism in the early 20th century, some critics have become far more appreciative of his intellectual subtlety. His work, which is said to reward deep patient observation, is held in major museums around the world, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Tate Modern, the Centre Pompidou, the Museum of Modern Art New York, and the Art Institute of Chicago, among others. His paintings invite viewers to see the world anew, and to rediscover the extraordinary in the ordinary, perhaps an ongoing testament to the enduring power of his art. However, his reputation as a great artist rests on reinterpreting those earlier valid negative criticisms as positive values today. The question, is Pierre Bonnard a great artist? Will continue to be a genuine and unresolved problem for art history scholars, now and into the future.